I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this is the follow-up, our weekly podcast you can only get here on the Middle Podcast feed. And by the way, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Substack newsletter. It's at listentothemiddle.substack.com. We also just started a dollar for dollar match for your tax-deductible donations to the Middle at listentothemiddle.com, thanks to a generous donation from the Tyler Dickman Foundation, which means that every dollar that you give is now doubled to the Middle for a limited time. So listentothemiddle.com for that. Okay, so we are following up on 3 items today that you, our listeners, have left us messages about. And joining me to do that is the great Kmele Foster, editor-at-large at Tangle News, co-host of the Fifth Column podcast, and a friend to this show. Kmele, great to have you here on the follow-up.
Jeremy, always great to talk to you, man.
All right, so I want to start with Greenland, which, or Iceland, I guess, as President Trump called it multiple times in a speech the other day. But it is actually Greenland. The president wants it to be part of the U.S. He says if we don't take it from Denmark, Russia, or China, we'll try. As you know, European countries, NATO allies sent in troops to Greenland to do military exercises. The president threatened them with new tariffs. The stock market dropped. And then after all that, the president reversed course and said he's not going to use force to take Greenland. What do you make of this?
It is an absolute mess. It's utterly absurd. The speech at Davos was beyond laughable. It's kind of an embarrassment. It is one of those moments where I found myself wondering, is he okay? All of that said, there is, I think, a kind of geopolitical through line that one can draw if you're going to take the idea seriously, and certainly the competition for control of the Arctic, this kind of rivalry between the great powers, China, Russia, the United States, is a very real thing. The challenge, though, with the kind of we need to acquire Greenland, we must have Greenland completely and totally, is that at the moment, the United States has a pretty great relationship with Denmark. And we have a military base on Greenland. I believe it's the only military base on Greenland. And if we wanted more from Greenland, we could get it all, really and truly. We could probably have pretty much everything short of actually owning it without anyone being particularly concerned or upset about it. At least we could have, until the president began to alienate most of our allies while denigrating Denmark from the stage.
Right.
Last week, and it's all like it's Idiocracy is a film that I think about a lot. And I oftentimes think about it and how I first watched it and thought it was utterly absurd. And now I rewatch it and I think to myself, oh, there's Terry Crews. We know each other. That's fun. But I also think it's almost prophetic. Like there's something about this movie that gets at something absolutely true about the human condition and about American politics.
Well, and I wonder, like, even after the sort of, I guess people would call it a taco, Trump always chickens out. He backed off of the idea of using force in Greenland. What, if any, is the long-term damage to America's reputation, to the NATO alliance, from even getting this far along with this conversation about the idea that America would go and seize land that is owned by one of its very close allies?
Yeah. Well, the perception of a country and its people, and let alone its leadership, these are different things, but they're closely related. President Trump, in about 3 years, is probably not going to be president of the United States anymore. And that's fine. It could also be the case that Republicans lose the White House and are no longer in kind of this pole position with respect to national politics. But there is going to be a hangover. There is a perception around the world of America as a country that elected Donald Trump. And whatever his interesting eccentricities, if I'm going to be generous here in the characterization, that is going to have some lingering effect. Whoever else comes into office, there will be some optimism, I suspect, if it's someone else of a very different political vintage, with a very different character. And perhaps we'll get a bit of a honeymoon. This reminds me of Barack Obama winning the Nobel Peace Prize before he'd done anything other than getting sworn in, which, again, that's people wanting something different. So you might get that. But they've had 2 rounds of Donald Trump at this point. And the second round of Donald Trump has been quite a bit more unbridled, exceptionally unpredictable. The tariff antagonism and the ridiculous memeing will continue. So it's hard to say what the repercussions of this will be in the long run beyond the kind of policy implications, but there will be some kind of hangover after this. And if it's more Republicans and more Republicans of this particular strange vintage, then that's going to have even more dramatic effects. And the likelihood that eventually NATO unravels and other really major things begin to happen becomes a real possibility that we have to imagine. And in fact, I suspect we've been imagining it for the past couple of weeks, actually.
Well, and I've said before that I think given our short attention spans because of social media in particular, it's going to be very hard for any president to be president for more than 4 years from now on, because people just forget about what it was like before. And it's very easy to, you know, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. Just getting to the point that you were talking about before, that there is like a kernel of truth to the idea that maybe the U.S. should have Greenland, even if the Greenlandic people don't want us to have it. This is Deborah, who called in from Tampa, Florida, who had this take on the Greenland issue.
No one has mentioned a reality that struck me today. When the Arctic melts and shipping lanes open up, do you really think that Russia and China are not going to be all over the map up there, including wanting ports in Greenland? I do believe it's almost inevitable, and, you know, I'm really a flower child. I have no business treading in this unknown territory, but I really can't imagine that it is not possible that they will enter into whatever kind of trouble they can make to get a space for trading.
I mean, she's probably right about that.
I love the humility too from that flower child. That's a woman after my own heart.
Well, I guess I wonder, just to wrap up this conversation about Greenland, do you think, Kmele Foster, that Trump will end his presidency with the U.S. owning more land than when he started, whether it's Greenland or Panama or Gaza or Venezuela or Canada? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, Canada, the 51st state. I think it's unlikely, but I'm going to make it interesting and say, sure, why not?
Wow. Okay. Well,
I don't know how it will happen, but why not bet on that?
Yeah.
You know, I stopped making political predictions about elections after Donald Trump won the Republican primary the first time around, because I was so astonished. And I said, to the extent I got this so wrong, because I insisted it would never happen and I would eat my hat, and I welched on that bet. But I don't really make those kinds of calculations, especially where Trump is concerned. It is astounding to me that he managed to get reelected after January 6th. There is a great deal that he manages to do. And sometimes, for brief moments, there is an incredible kind of competence in this administration, particularly in the foreign policy domain.
All right, let's switch topics to science and trust in science, which dropped after the COVID pandemic. And now, of course, there are a number of science skeptics like RFK Jr. in positions of power. The administration has been trying to slash science funding. What do you think, first of all, about sort of trust in science? I know you were very critical during the COVID pandemic of a lot of the restrictions that were going on, which is one of the reasons why people sort of they don't want to be told what to do by scientists, by politicians, quoting scientists, telling them what to do. But what do you think about the lack of trust right now in science? It's still high, but it's not what it was.
Yeah, I mean, there's been this decline of trust in institutions writ large, and it's just something we've talked about before. The media has dealt with this. Most important institutions, universities have. And I think the sciences have suffered in a particular way. But in some respects, and this may be a similarity with journalism, it's because of a kind of overconfidence that we've had in the scientific enterprise. There is, I think, a sensibility, we can perhaps call this scientism, amongst most of the public and most of the very learned public, that, well, this has been decided by science. And that's not really the way that we should be thinking about science. It's not a matter of just kind of arriving at these catechisms, these facts about the universe that we absolutely know for a certainty. Science is a practice. It is not a kind of mechanism for simply divining conclusions. It is a process for trying to get at what is true about the world. And if you understand that it's a process and that it's always going to be revealing itself, then when someone like Fauci comes out and makes a proclamation and declares something to be true, you'll know that there is always the possibility that new evidence could complicate the picture further. And the humility that we heard from the caller a moment ago, I think would serve a lot of people who are in positions of power, who work in the sciences and talk to the public about really complicated issues. Just acknowledging the complexity is the sort of thing that I think you could actually begin utilizing to start to cultivate greater public trust again. Not overconfidence, not definite certainty in every circumstance, but some modesty and acknowledgement, and an acknowledgement of the complexity inherent in so many important things.
But I just think when you bring up Fauci and saying, this is the case, and then having to walk it back in some cases, then you think about this administration and RFK Jr. and Trump coming out and saying Tylenol is what causes autism. Tylenol by pregnant women is what causes autism. It's like a lot of
it's a similar error. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and listen here to a couple of these voicemails that we got from listeners who it sounds like would be part of the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement. Listen to Elijah in Chicago first.
I think the major reason that people don't trust science anymore is that many of the articles that have been submitted for publication and are published and then picked up by the news, etc., are agenda-driven. And rather than talk about the intellectual resistant, I think the journals and the purveyors of science have to do a fundamental and thorough self-examination to make sure that they're not allowing the zeitgeist to corrupt their reports.
All right, and then here is Carrie in Biloxi, Mississippi.
I was wondering if scientists could help examine institutions that everybody is skeptical about. And I would say big pharma, the food industrial complex, where we have all of these guidelines and we have all of these payouts. They have a lot of buyouts, a lot of lobbying that makes them. I'm just wondering if scientists could try and analyze how these industries could be more accurate and realistic.
So you can hear there the lack of trust in institutions that you were talking about. But then I wonder, has the MAHA movement led by RFK Jr. that helped bring Trump back into power done anything to restore trust in science?
I don't know that they have. As we were saying a moment ago, I think that they really do have just a different kind of political orientation, which leads them to prefer different conclusions. But they talk with the same overconfident certainty. I also think what the point the caller made about the zeitgeist, like actually having a meaningful impact on the way that various institutions talk about science, and to put it a different way, just the politicization of science and even the kind of academic pursuit of scientific truth and the social sciences and beyond, that's a real thing. And it's important for us to recognize it. I think the challenge, however, is to imagine that you can ever completely purify the cathedral of science. You can't. Scientists are biased. Journalists are biased. Our biases necessarily inform the way that we view the world. And I think it is far better for us to not adopt a kind of cynicism about that, but to adopt a thoroughgoing, curious, meaningful skepticism that is actually employed in a productive way. So we ask questions, well, what might be left out here? What are the conclusions? And the third thing I'd say is science journalism needs to be a lot better. It is so frequent that there will be a study that comes out and it will reveal what is imagined to be the conclusion of the study. But if you're the sort of curious person that I know you are, occasionally you go read that study and you read the conclusion of the study, and there are all kinds of important qualifications and caveats that are there in the research. These scientists are doing their work in sometimes really careful ways, but the journalism, the reporting, the public conversation about their efforts doesn't always follow suit, because things get deployed or employed in ways that kind of benefit our particular points of view and our particular politics. And I think that is exceptionally detrimental. And that, of course, is still going on today.
So just, you're bringing up something that came up in our show with our guests, Flora Lichtman of Science Friday and Priya Natarajan, who's the head of the Yale Astronomy Department, which is humility would help for science
Yes.
journalists, for scientists, not coming across as smug, but being open to different ideas and being open to people who don't have near the level of training about science, questioning them about what they're saying.
Yeah, I think that's all correct. And I think the public in general could adopt a perspective where when people are wrong, they admit they're wrong and they talk openly about the reasons why they were wrong. We should not hold that against them. We should applaud that. We should encourage it. Exchanging error for truth is part of the scientific process. It is as hard for scientists as it is for any of the rest of us, but we can actually make that easier for people by demonstrating a little bit of grace. So humility on their side, grace on our side.
All right, well, stand by, because in just a moment, we're going to be talking about what could be the biggest issue ahead of the midterm elections. The follow-up with Kmele Foster from Tangle News will be right back. Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by journalist Kmele Foster, who's editor-at-large at Tangle News. Kmele, so we've talked about Greenland. There's also been, Venezuela. That wasn't too long ago. Minnesota and all the things with ICE going on there. But we had Zoe Clark, who's the political director at Michigan Public, on last week. And I asked her what the single biggest issue for Michiganders ahead of the midterm elections is. And she said, quote, affordability, 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 and oh, by the way, affordability. What do you think? Do you agree with that? I'm not about Michigan, but just about voters in general. With everything that's going on, it's still going to come down to pocketbook.
I think that is absolutely true. I think that is almost certainly true for most voters across the board. However well off you are, you have concerns about that. Even if you're a billionaire, you have employees that are indispensable to your operation, and being able to keep those employees has a lot to do with where you open your offices and what the cost of groceries is. So yes, I think that's absolutely true. And I also think that's a real challenge for the Trump administration, who I think rode a populist wave into the White House. I think it's fair to say that, and perhaps capitalized on Democrats losing sight of this same core insight that affordability, those practical things, the stuff of life, are the things that probably matter most. And at the moment, you have the President of the United States, who has in recent months said that affordability is some sort of Democratic plot, some sort of scam. That is not a pathway to political success in this country, in my estimation. I think it is urgently important that we focus on affordability, and there are so many places where we could be doing that in a more sober way, from healthcare to, I just talked about kind of groceries and all the other practical things, to, of course, the most important and expensive purchase most of us will make, a house, which, while interest rates are coming down a little bit, we're still not building enough housing in the places where most people seem to want to live.
Yeah. Let's listen here to a listener who called in about this. This is Karen in Baxter, Tennessee.
Trump has negatively impacted my life and everyone that I know and love. Gas prices, maybe they've dropped a penny, I don't know, but it is certainly not helping me. My electric bill has doubled. You can't get as many groceries as you used to be able to. It's just awful in this state, in this community, in this county. Little old Baxter, it's disappointed me.
I mean, this is something, Trump has pointed to the fact that gas prices have come down, but when you hear Karen there talk about all the other things that have gone up, how do you think Trump is doing on the economy?
I think it is a decidedly mixed bag. And quite honestly, I would go further than that, because my greatest fear with respect to the economy, apart from the debt and deficit, which I've long been concerned about and continue to go in the wrong direction, the fact of the tariffs, the constant manipulation of the economy, the bold, persistent experimentation, to borrow a phrase from another time, that the administration is doing with tariff policy and threats, it's created so much uncertainty that it has contributed to a less stability in the economy, and the economy is already malformed. At the moment, most of the economic growth that is happening in this country is concentrated in the AI sector. It is data centers that are getting built. It is a bit of a speculative play. AI is a real, interesting, amazing, likely revolutionary technology, and that likely is doing way too much work there, because I think it's a virtual certainty. But there may be some fits and starts, which could create some severe problems. And I think the president is playing with fire, and we've been fortunate that the tariffs haven't created greater friction in the economy, but we are hardly out of the woods. There is so much opportunity yet. for all of that to create serious problems, especially if he makes some of these bolder threats and then manages to follow through on them. How can you plan for your business? How can you hire? How can you fill your inventories when you don't know whether or not, the tariffs are going to increase by 100% or fall by 200%?
Well, and on the issue of AI, it may be juicing the stock market and some companies in many ways right now. But we also just recently did a show about whether AI is going to take your job. And a lot of people called in and said, yes, they believe it will take their job. And there's a prediction out there that 100 million US jobs could be lost to AI in the next 10 years. So yeah,
I'm a little more optimistic about that. But I do think the dislocation from AI is inevitable. It's going to change things. You might be out of work for a little while. You might need to upskill. But I'm generally of the perspective that AI is going to help us all do our jobs much, much, much better. I think it'll be more like the ATM than some of these other kind of more destructive innovations.
You wouldn't know this, but do you think the Supreme Court is going to get rid of the tariffs, or the ability of Trump to put in these tariffs?
I don't know why they're taking so long.
They do seem to move faster on things that he wants than the things that he doesn't want.
I don't know what the motivation is. I don't know what's taking so long. Maybe it's hard to write the opinion, but I hope they do. If I'm honest, my inclination is to suspect they're going to try to find a way to evade it. Only because when the stakes are really high like this, they seem to sort of try to give the president a bit more rope. But the early hearings in this case, and I believe Learning is the Supreme Court case. The early hearings in this case did demonstrate like a lot of skepticism on the part of all of the justices towards the argument that the administration is leveraging. I don't think that is enough to necessarily get to the outcome that I would prefer, which is reining in the president's ability to unilaterally impose tariffs on whomever he wants and essentially to declare everything an emergency. I hope that they rein that in, but I'm not confident that they will. I really do think the people here who ought to be doing this are Congress. They could take away this authority. They could clear things up immediately. And my suspicion is if things get sufficiently bad, even the Republicans who have really fallen into line for the president might gain some backbone here, push back, and as they tried to do with the War Powers Act briefly, actually assert themselves and say, no, this is our responsibility. If someone is going to be raising and lowering tariffs, it's going to be us, and it's going to happen through the legislative process, not unilaterally from the executive branch.
They tried to do that with the War Powers Act, but then they didn't because he made a few phone calls and a couple of senators backed off.
But it required some extraordinary effort on the White House's part. I think that is a crack in the armor, as is a lot of the defections from Congress and the fact that quietly a lot of Republicans are deciding not to run again or to run for different offices. They've got both houses of Congress and the White House. What do they notice that makes them not want to stick around for what ought to be a kind of cushy situation? Maybe it is some doubt about or some suspicion that they have a vulnerable position.
Okay, finally, and I know you don't make political predictions, so your prediction, we're ending the show with predictions. I'm stealing this from the McLaughlin group. No, but it doesn't have to be political. You can do about anything. Okay. So you get to make any prediction right now, Kmele Foster.
Gosh. Well, you know what? I am going to make a hopeful prediction. I don't have any reason to believe this, but I hear Netflix is adapting Steinbeck's East of Eden, which I've been rereading recently. And I want to say that it's going to be very good. So I'm just going to put that out there in the ether.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to predict that Netflix is going to get Warner Brothers Discovery in that deal, but you're not going to make that prediction right now.
I'm not going to make that prediction. I don't know. And I won't even tell you my inclinations there.
Okay. Kmele Foster, editor-at-large at Tangle News. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it, brother.